So today we're going to talk about content marketing. At least I'm going to tell you my experience with content marketing, what I did, what worked, what didn't. So it's going to be more of a reflecting on a story. So just to start with that, so as Mark said, in a nutshell, over the last decade, I built a company that was a software services firm, basically. And I sold it to Twitter, and I was there for about 2 years, and just recently left to work on something else. So that's kind of like that in a nutshell. But really, the story starts in the mid 2000s. I was just kind of coming out of the dot-com crash. I really didn't have much going on in terms of technology. The tech sector was dead. I was actually at the time running a bar, owning a bar in San Francisco, because people still had to drink. So that seemed like a good investment. But I was itching to get back into technology. And I saw this ad on Craigslist. It was basically a non-profit trying to bridge the digital divide. They basically said, hey, we're looking for somebody to teach underprivileged youth, minorities, women, people like that, inner city kids about, how to build websites so they can get technology jobs as opposed to break into, cars and steal stereos or flip burgers or whatever else they would do, right? And I was like, wow, this is really cool, and I'll do this on, evenings and weekends. So I started teaching Java and PHP classes for these kids, inner city kids. And then somebody came to me and said, hey, you can do this corporate. I'm like, really? There's a market for that? So I put together a little website. It just basically said we do Java training, but it was, I guess, optimized for search engines. This is the early days of like search engine optimization. And very quickly we started getting phone calls. Like basically, Williams-Sonoma called us, Bureau of Land Management called us. All these clients that I would never have access to. And I was like, wow, like I'm getting calls from like this Fortune 500 companies. This is amazing. What did we do right? So out of that, we basically developed a marketing strategy that I'm really proud of. So at the end of the day, the company that we sold was just a services company selling training to companies like Intel, Cisco, Qualcomm. Whenever they needed to educate their engineers, we would send an instructor. We would fly all over the world, and we would basically teach a class on, say, Android to Intel or Java to Cisco, that sort of thing. So nothing really high-tech about what we did. It was still a guy instructor in front of a classroom teaching a class. So nothing really fancy about that. But what I'm really proud of is how we actually sold it, right? So we never ever went outbound to call a client. We would never be like, hey, do you need some training? It was always our phone was ringing off the hook. And that was, I thought it was really amazing the marketing system that we developed. So that's what I'm sort of gonna talk about. There's a longer story of like the whole starting a company and crashing, and I did a whole TED talk about that. But that's there for your reference. I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's an interesting. The takeaway from this is that growth of a company is rarely, like in my experience, linear. So it doesn't go progressively just up and to the right, but it's more like sort of like this long S curves, right? So it's for a long time. It's really, really hard, and you're not going anywhere. And for us, that was like 5-year period. And then all of a sudden you figure something out and you get into this like rapid growth area. So that was kind of like the takeaway from my experience, a couple of experiences building companies. So we're going to talk about the Maracana content marketing story. We did this before the term content marketing existed. So only now, reflecting back, I can say, we've been doing that for like a very long time, but it wasn't the thing yet, content marketing. So it was just sort of like what we did because we were trying to find a good way to sell services, right? So like I said, for the longest time, we were barely keeping the lights on. So 2007, 2008, I remember those dark days. Nobody was buying anything. Like business was very hard, and we did not really have a massive marketing budget. We did not have a system to sell. We did not have much of anything. We were just trying to kind of figure out like what is a thing that works, and then how can we do that times 10 or times 100? Like I was looking for something that we can scale, right? In terms of our systematic approach to marketing, right? So for the longest time we were just treading water. So what we started doing, if you remember, like my early success was putting up a website, optimizing it, and getting Google to show us up at the top, and like basically getting those inbound calls. So we started doing more of that, and as we were doing more of that, so were our competitors. So it was basically everyone was trying to outcompete one another in how to optimize the website. And I don't know how much you know about the whole search engine optimization, but it's basically, you know, we don't know exactly what Google is valuing how much, and it's always like this, playing these tricks, hoping that you win one up from your competitors, right? But you're basically, you know, playing in the dark. There isn't really, there's no knowledge of like what exactly works, what doesn't. And then what would happen all of a sudden is Google changes the algorithm and things just tank, or they penalize you for something that you have no idea why, and suddenly you just disappear from search engines and you're nowhere to be found, which happened to us. And there isn't really a 1-800 number to call and complain. So those were sort of like the issues that we had. But we were trying to basically use search engine optimization for a long time to kind of get like one up, and we were kind of having mixed results with that. So to be a little more predictable, we're like, all right, well, you know, we'll start buying advertising, right? And you know, Google has AdWords, and you can certainly buy that. And in the early days, it wasn't expensive. A few people did it, and we were sort of like ahead of the curve. So it was kind of, you know, cost effective to buy AdWords, and we knew exactly which terms people would be bidding on, and so we were able to kind of get some business going on that way. But very quickly, the market became saturated. So it came to a point where we weren't really getting much of the return on AdWords. And what I didn't like about this approach is that it's basically like renting versus buying, right? Or owning. So the moment I would stop my campaign is the moment that my sales would stop, right? Like I would not have any inbound leads the moment I run out of my budget. And our budget was about $1,000 and between $1,000 and $2,000 a month for AdWords. So it would dry up really quickly. Plus competitors would like outbid you, or you know, do false clicks and things like that. So it wasn't really working for us. So I was looking for something that's more of something that actually is more long-term, something that we can build and own, right? Like something that's a shelf asset of a company, right? And the more I was thinking about that, I was kind of going back to the first principle. What is Google's job in life, right? So they want to present the best content to their people, right? Their users. So when a user is looking for Java training, Google should really surface up things that are legitimately the best thing for users about Java training, right? So that's kind of how we got thinking about, well, what is it the user would really want? Like, you know, what is the content that we could present to them? So that's kind of how we got into the whole, like, we should start thinking about generating useful content, not just have a brochure website. Because up until then, our website was just like a brochure, right? Like, hi, here we are, aren't we great? You know, this is what we sell, click here and call us, right? There isn't really anything for the user other than our pitch. Nothing valuable. So we wanted to go beyond that. So in the early days, we were running meetups. I was in a business with my brother, and he was really passionate about meetups. So we ran San Francisco Java meetup, or a user group. And these are some early meetups. This is our office, which was in a loft in Potrero Hill. I was actually living downstairs, and this was the office was upstairs. So it wasn't very convenient at all. And this is what basically it would look like. So we would, you know, invite people just like this, and we would have a topic and speakers in a specific domain, and people would come and talk. And so this was the turnout was pretty good, and people really enjoyed it. But it wasn't scalable. Like we would get basically maybe 50 to 100 people show up, but we weren't getting anything out of that per se. Like the audience weren't buyers. Okay, so they would come, they would enjoy the talk, they would walk away, and that was about it. And it was driving me a little crazy. It was driving me crazy because I was the one who was buying the pizza, right? I was cleaning up the place afterwards, and I didn't really get much back. Like I felt like we were giving to the community, but there wasn't any sort of like kudos back, right? And drove me crazy, and I didn't like this sort of like half-baked sort of program. And I was always arguing with my brother. I was like, hey, we're either gonna figure out how to do this properly, pro style, raise the bar basically on it, or we're just gonna kill it. Like I don't like this in between sort of like thing that we have going on. So that drove me crazy quite a bit. So I had this idea. I was like, hey, why don't we just buy a camera and throw it in the back of the room, film the thing, and like post it. And so we did. So we bought this, I think it was a $600 camera, and we just put it on a tripod just like this, and we basically started recording the talks. At that time, YouTube was strictly, I think, 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever the limit was. That was the thing. But we were sort of, because we were involved in a community, we called up Google and we said, hey, like, can you guys give us like an unlimited account? And so they did. So we got one of the first early sort of like, you can post as much content as you want, any length. So we were basically able to post like hour-long talks, which were basically recordings of our meetups onto YouTube, right? So we started doing that, and I was like, wow, this is actually, there's something here, right? And the something was the audience that was in the room. It was 50 to 100 people, but then on YouTube we would get 500 to 1,000 visitors, right? So now this is 10x, right? Now this becomes interesting to me at least, right? Because I was thinking from like, how can I bottle a sales marketing system and scale it up? That's what my objective was. How do I get the system to work, package it? So this worked. But it was very costly for us to edit it, like basically to download the editing software, to take the video, to chop it, to put the bumpers in an intro, outro, to like pro style it. It was basically time-wise costly for me and my brother, right? So we basically said, how about we go and find a guy, right? So we went to a local, one of the film schools in San Francisco, I forget which one, but Academy of Art or something, and we basically said, hey, we're looking for somebody who can help us video editing part-time. So we hired Max, and this is basically Max. He would film the talks. He would also edit them, and the filming is actually the easy part. The hard part is the editorial work. Nowadays, everyone can buy a cheap camera and throw it on a tripod, but what comes afterwards is hard. And also, usually what's hard by just doing it yourself with a camera is usually people get the video right, but they don't get the audio right. It's usually almost always a fail. And that's why I'm wearing this microphone to capture directly into the camera. That makes a huge difference later on when you're watching the video. So this worked. So we hired more people. So we're a tiny shop, right? But our entire marketing budget, sales and marketing budget, was basically this, right? So out of 15 people, 5 people were doing content marketing essentially, right? So we had 3 video guys at a time. So this is Rob, and as you can see, cameras got better and tripods got bigger, and so we kind of like started like raising the bar on the whole thing. This is Evan. He's another one of the video guys, and so on. So at this point, we are covering all the meetups. We have more meetups. So first, we started just with the San Francisco SF Java, right? And SF Java is about 6,000 members, right? And we would have one meetup a month, right? But now we have capacity to do more. So we're like, okay, well, why don't we, spun out new new meetups. And just to kind of explain Maracana, so we're a training company, but we're sort of like picking these niches, right? Like Java is a niche, and so we go in and like we start doing training in that thing. But then there's always the hot new technology, right? Like Ruby on Rails, we were the first ones, right? Android, we were the first ones. Scala, we were the first ones, etc. So whenever there's a category, our approach was, before we actually start selling into it, because we are nobodies, what we would do is we would start getting what they call a street credibility, right? And the way we get street credibility was through content. So for example, we think Scala is going to be huge. Before we even develop a offering, like a service that we can sell to clients, what we would do is we would try to spun up a community around Scala. So we would start SF Scala meetup, right? We would host it, we would film it, we would create videos around that content. And suddenly, like, we become somebodies in this ecosystem. Like, we become like known as the place to learn about Scala, right? And whichever technology of the day is, that was basically our approach. I would call it like the air support, right? Like, so before our instructors even pick up a technology, we send the big carriers in the air support to kind of dominate the land we're taking, right? And that was, to us, content marketing was that system. So meetups grew. We stopped hosting it in our own offices because it didn't scale. So this is that's Google up there, and the bottom one it's actually me speaking at Microsoft in San Francisco. So just to kind of give you an idea, so we kind of raised the bar on these meetups. We were now hosted at Google's and Microsoft's of the world, Yelp's, Square. All these technology companies wanted to have us in because we would bring, like this particular talk in Microsoft had like 400 people. They were like satellite rooms because we packed the place. And we did it because we raised the bar so high for our meetups that this was a talk on Scrum, and we had the guy who invented Scrum fly in from Boston to do a talk, Jeff Sutherland. Right? So it was really sort of like a high bar for the content, high bar for the venues, and we recorded all that. And keep in mind, there are 400 people here, but I was more interested about 4,000 people that are going to see it subsequently. To me, the actual meetup event is just there to get the footage, right? Because that doesn't scale, right? What does scale is that footage that's now on YouTube, and that content starts to snowball. So remember, you buy AdWords, right? The moment you stop paying is the moment your pipeline dries out. No more leads, right? But with content marketing, your content becomes more and more viewed, and it kind of snowballs. It becomes more and more important. The longer it's seasoned out there in the world, the more people are referring to it and saying, hey, like if you're looking for technology X, watch this. And so it becomes sort of like a perpetual thing, to the point that like even if I stop doing any marketing for years, the phone would keep on ringing, right? So that's the shelf life of content is pretty long, and it keeps snowballing. So that was the really, really nice thing about that. So at this point, we sort of ran out of meetups. Right? So we had SF Java, SF Python, SF Scala, SF Android, like all these things. We basically had at least one meetup a week, usually more per week, right? So we sort of like saturated San Francisco Bay Area in terms of meetups. We were like, okay, now what, right? We started toying with the idea of like going to organizers in other hot technology places and sort of like sending them a kit with a camera and like how to, and so they upload the instructions, but that didn't really take off, right? So one idea that came up was with respect to Scala. So Scala we thought was going to be huge, and we needed the air support for Scala, so we needed content. But there wasn't a lot of going on locally. There was a conference, the only conference in the US, it was called Northeast Scala Conference, NE-Scala, and it was happening in Boston. So we called the organizers and we're like, hey, you guys have the awesome conference, would it be okay if we come and film it for you? We'll film it, we'll post-produce it, we'll release it on YouTube free of charge. And they're like, whoa, what's the catch? Like, we can't afford this, right? Like, what's the catch? We're like, no catch. The only thing that we're going to do is we're going to basically put a little logo in the bottom that says this is produced by Maracana. And you can host it. We'll give you full credit that this is your conference. Everyone gets the credit. But we just want to be the, put a little logo in the bottom. That's it on our video. So, their attendees benefit, they benefit, community benefits, everyone wins, right? So they're like, wow, this is amazing. So that's how we would fly our video people to Boston for 2 days. We would get this amazing footage, come back, and we would just start, releasing it on a regular cycle, creating this excitement, right? People are now like, if you want to learn Scala, well, Maracana is the to-go-to place. There's like a video coming, every week, every day, depending on how much content we had in a backlog. But we were just kept cranking at it, right? And so people were just kind of keep coming. And suddenly we're the place to go to to learn Android or Scala or whatever, right? So that was sort of like the approach that we did with conferences. So that was another way to scale. So that time business started growing, and we moved from my loft to a downtown San Francisco place, a legitimate office space, and we actually converted a room that's the size of this room to a studio. So we now had a full-on downtown San Francisco studio, and that allowed us now to do some original content. Meaning, so far we've been going to other people's meetups and conferences and filming them, but now we could do something that's more interesting. Something that's more like do interviews and such. So we created a concept called Breaking Open, and it was about interviewing people behind significant technologies, right? So for example, I don't know if you know CyanogenMod. That's kind of like the alternative to official Android. So we would interview the team, right, behind CyanogenMod. We would interview the people behind, we would have the interview with people behind HTML5. I interviewed the person in charge of Erlang, which is the language that powers WhatsApp and a lot of games and things like that, right? So we would basically have this concept that we created that was about interviewing people behind significant technologies. So that was the studio allowed us to do that. One of the most successful things for free content was recording classes and giving them away for free. Now, this is really kind of it was strange to a lot of people, right? So a typical training company, right? A typical training company is basically a sales organization. They usually don't have their own instructors, they're contractors, right? And they may have their own course material, but if they have their course material, they try to lock it down so God forbid somebody photocopies it or even puts it on internet, right? So you would go take a Java class and they would give you a printout binder with content material. If you ask for a soft copy, typically you wouldn't get a soft copy because that could appear somewhere online, right? So training companies were very protective of their IP, their course material, right? And they were very protective of who instructors are, because what if you bypass them and client goes directly to them, right? So what we did is we flipped that upside down, right? So we basically said, all this content that we're creating for courses, and we actually wrote, we did a hardcore research on a lot of technologies and wrote amazing content. How about we just give it away? How about we just put it online and make it available to anyone free of charge? And not only that, how about if I started getting into a thing where when I was teaching a class, I would record my classes and give that to students. So as I program on my laptop, during the class, I would screencast the whole thing, and so they don't need to worry about taking notes. I'll just give them videos afterwards, right? So I was like, how about we put all that on YouTube? Now think about that. Our best-selling class was Android Bootcamp, right? People would pay $2,500 for a week to come and take a class, and they would fly in from all over the world, right, to take a class with me or somebody else in San Francisco. I'm using that as an example. $2,500 plus hotel plus the airfare and all that stuff. Now we would give. What I was basically suggesting is how about entire class, everything that happens in the room, nothing gets censored. Everything that happens in the room that gets recorded, and we just give the whole thing for free on YouTube. And that's exactly what we did, right? And a lot of people are like, you crazy, like how this is, what's the, like this doesn't make sense, right? But what made sense was understanding who the customer is, and more importantly, who the customer is not, right? So what I realized is that people in India or Russia or like African countries, wherever, they were never gonna fly in, you know, it's very unlikely they're gonna come and take this class. It doesn't make sense for them. Yet they're hungry for content. They're hungry to learn, right? So they love this stuff, right? On the flip side, an engineer at Cisco here, or an engineer at Intel or Qualcomm or DoD, who are our clients, they were never gonna sit and watch YouTube at work, right? They're just gonna go to their boss and they're like, I need to fly to San Francisco, take this class. So it was very clear, like, this is the customers and these are not the customers. So essentially, we were not cannibalizing our own customer base. We were basically giving our content away to people who are never gonna be customers, right? I'm kind of famous in India actually, because a lot of people learn Android through me. But like, they were never gonna really be a paying customers. Now, what happened in turn is that they loved the non-customers, the people who consumed the free content, they loved it so much that they would basically say, hey, this is the thing. Like, these guys are legit. That gave us the street cred, right? That's what Google looks for. That's what Cisco buyer looks for, right? They're looking for like, who is a legitimate, you know, service provider in X, right? And basically, the people who we gave content away for free to vouched for us, right? Pointed to us, right? Via various social media things or whatever. They were talking about our content. It wasn't us anymore. So we didn't have anybody doing anything other than the video stuff, right? So one of the things that we realized is that we also had to be very clear about on the site, like, you know, like we don't want to sort of like sandwich like free and paid and kind of be unclear about what's what. So we made it sort of like obvious, like, look, you know, we are in business. We are for profit and very profitable organization, right? We do sell classes, right? But we also do this free stuff. And so we kind of made a separation. So we did not want to get confused or, you know, confuse people that we are just doing this for free, that we are non-profit or something like that. No, we're for profit, but we also give all this content away. Like, we generate all this stuff, right? Recent stream posts. So that's what we would do a lot of. So kind of made it clear. And this is the next iteration of the site that kind of like made it even more kind of streamlined. You see at the top free resources and training and mentorship. So it was kind of like broken down. And these are sort of like the big sort of like technology areas that we would try to get into. So next, what I wanted to so that's sort of a little bit about Maracana and sort of like my experience with that. So next, what I wanted to just kind of show you a couple of case studies who I think is doing this well, and you know, for you to maybe get inspired, pick up some ideas from, and so forth. So one of the places that I borrowed a lot of concepts from is the Stanford e-corner. I stumbled upon this site long time ago, 10 years ago or something, and I was like, wow, these guys actually, you know, this is pretty smart. What they would do is they would invite you know, speakers, prominent Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and, you know, leaders and things like that, to talk to a class. But they would take the talk and they would also chop it into sort of like more of a bite-size, digestible sort of videos, and they would post them, and they would also loop you into their email. So like basically every month or every week you would get this email that's basically, here's the latest talks, and it was very valuable to me as somebody who was like building a company. I was like, wow, this is actually a very valuable service, right? So I got a lot of inspirations from the e-corner. That was one of the early ones. This is one of the newer ones. So this is First Round Capital is a VC firm here in the Valley. And what they do is I think they do content marketing really well. They invite also prominent Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, leaders, people like that to talk. They do a talk, but then they film this talk, but they also transcribe this talk into an article. So they also get so from a single event like this, they get a video, but they also get a nice post that is digestible in a different form, right? So for people who enjoy reading versus just watching, right? So they do a really good job with that and have really good track record with that. Andreessen and Horowitz, I really like their podcasts. So they're, again, it's a little bit of a different concept. So I don't know if they do videos or blog posts that much, but I really enjoy their podcasts. It's something that I can consume while I'm on a treadmill or something like that at the gym, right? It's really valuable. It's very useful. You can listen to it in the car and so on. But they're more like 15 minutes to 45 minutes, but well produced, relevant, educational content, right? I didn't say, but I think it goes without saying. None of this implies any direct selling, right? So nobody's trying to sell their services through. This is purely 100% valuable stuff for their users. It's not about pitching the company and the product, right? That comes sort of by building the reputation, right? So these are sort of just the 3 case studies, other than Maracana, for just as an inspiration. So finally, I wanted to kind of just get into some sort of nuts and bolts, things that I think are sort of the takeaways, or what's a little important, how to make this happen. This is Tim O'Reilly. How many of you know who Tim O'Reilly is? So Tim O'Reilly runs O'Reilly Media, which is not the biggest, but probably the most reputable technology media company. So they put together conferences, they publish books. I'm actually their author for a couple of books. And he speaks a lot, and he coined the terms such as Web 2.0, etc. Just a very, very smart guy. So he has this talk that inspired me. I heard it at OSCON, a conference in Portland a long time ago. And basically his point is create more value than you capture. And that was his lesson to the OSCON is open source conference. So that was his message to the open source developers, right? And if you think about it, Maracana was all about open source software training, right? And open source is this thing where we're creating software and software is free, you can just basically take it and download it and use it for free. But then there's this small percentage of people who find it so useful that they pay you for support services, etc. And that's how you kind of recuperate your money. So essentially, software becomes your marketing, right? And that kind of sums it up in this whole create more value than you capture. And this really resonated with me. And that was the whole sort of the first principles, if you will, for content marketing is really create more value than you capture, right? So that's kind of if you think from the basic truths, this would be it. So he inspired me quite a bit. Another guy that inspired me, this is Alan Wise. Long time ago, I read a book called $1 Million Consultant. And basically, he talks about how do you become a solo $1 million consultant. And I was like, wow, this sounds like a really good goal. And and so kind of read the book and all that stuff. But one of the concepts that I really liked in that book is he talks about a marketing gravity, right? Because I was trying to think about how do I wrap my mind around this thing that I'm trying to create, this program for marketing, and it's basically you kind of want to create sort of a honey trap, a gravity that just attracts clients, right? Because I don't want to go outbound and call clients. I want business to just roll in, right? So how do you do that? And so he kind of decodes that into doing a whole bunch of different optional programs, right? From speaking to participating in community groups to writing for a paper to doing podcasts, having a website, self-publishing, yada yada, right? So these are all things that like a solo consultant or a consulting firm can do to increase the pull of that marketing gravity. Right, so that's kind of how I was thinking about our website. Remember, our website started as a brochureware website. You know, here's us, aren't we great? Click here to buy, right? And it became this hub, became this like place there people go to get valuable stuff, right? So it was no longer a brochureware. It was very much a fresh, useful content that made people, you know, better at what they do. So that's kind of how I was thinking. I was thinking about creating that gravity, that pull, and that when I look in retrospect, building the company, that's the thing that I'm most proud of, right? Because as our website was getting more and more visitors, there was a strong direct correlation to sales. Like basically, if there was one metric that I would look at is my website visitor number, and I could translate that directly into sales and profits, right? Like there was a very strong correlation. So to me, that was the key metric that I needed to watch. What's the pull of that gravity, right? And yes, you can optimize the rest of the funnel, etc., but like I really found the biggest bang for the buck to get more people to the site and have them find useful stuff, and everything else was going to work out from there on. So one of the things, you know, obviously you can do is start a meetup. So meetup.com is a great platform for that. Yes.
You did this worldwide free stuff, got it. But was the stuff that came down to the bottom, the sales and the profits, were they primarily this geography, or were your sales also on this larger geographic dispersion?
So the question is about where did we actually deliver service or do the sales. So clients would come from all over the world. So our clients were Cisco, Qualcomm, Motorola, DoD, Wells Fargo, U.S. government, Canadian government, British like organizations like that. So basically, who's who of like the big organizations. We would get business from all those people. We would typically not want. It's hard to do international business, but we did a lot of work for Intel, Cisco, Qualcomm, where we actually flew to India, China, etc., to deliver classes. So we trained over like thousands of engineers at Intel at 40 locations all over the world. So we would be on the crisscrossing the planet, but prefer to have the US clients. Just it's easier to do business. Yeah. So Meetup is one way to kind of bootstrap the community. Like I said, it's a great platform, and it's very much similar to what we're experiencing here. This feels like a meetup essentially, but it's just a platform that makes it easier to like kind of do all the logistics. And they also have an intelligent way to kind of like market it out to people who may be interested. So how do you sort of create this the system? I sort of think that like three components that are somewhat important, and the first one is a backlog. So if it's going to be meetup or if it's going to be interviews or a podcast, it doesn't really matter what that something is. Like you can kind of play with whichever you think would work for you. But it's good to have consistency, and to have consistency, it's good to have a backlog of people. Like for meetups, for example, we know who the speaker is for the next and the next one, and so on. So we kind of try to keep like that backlog at least a couple of months out, so that there's a continuous sort of like delivery of the content. So having that backlog is important. Yes.
Are these paid speakers, or these are basically marketing?
Yeah. The question is, are these paid free speakers or free? So we never paid any speakers. In meetups, they don't. It's not typical to pay. These are the people who they just love to share. Like for example, we are doing a talk on AngularJS. Well, we would get a guy who wrote AngularJS at Google to talk about it, right? And so basically, to him, it's increasing his visibility. His street cred, yes. And that's the one thing that we also, like O'Reilly working, I'm an author, O'Reilly author, right? And O'Reilly talks about like providing a platform on which you stand, right? Like, so you could be just like, a normal Silicon Valley engineer, right? You're probably not that well known. But like, why would you write a book, for example, right? Writing a book it pays less than a minimum wage. It should be like illegal, right? So why do people do it? Well, it creates this platform for you, right? Especially with a good publisher. So you don't make any money, but it creates this platform on which suddenly you become this like sort of like a celebrity in that like realm, and that that gives you, opens more doors, raises your bar, etc., etc. So that's why speakers do it. That's why authors do it, typically. Yeah. So never paid. Concept. So it's important to kind of like have a concept. Like we developed a couple of them. So meetups were our early concept, right? We kind of exhausted that. The next concept was doing conferences. So like we kind of did that. We bottled it and kind of just kept cranking at it. And then we created Breaking Open, which was a different concept. So whatever that something is for you, you can kind of play with different things. But like think about like, how do you bottle this thing? How it becomes like just something that's going to become automatic, right? So that you have a backlog of people and you have what you do, so it's easy even to pitch to the people because you now have a concept. This is what I think is going to look like. It's going to be a 10-minute interview, or it's going to be a 45-minute talk, or like what does the concept look like, right? Kind of like think about developing that. So that's one thing. And then frequency. I think it's important to have sort of like a regular cadence to this, right? Like you don't want to sort of like flood the market with like 2-3 things and then disappear for a while. So the being regular, whatever that cadence is, I think is important, because that people get kind of used to like, there's good stuff coming from these guys, and like they're gonna stay on your mailing list, and they're gonna be opted in to learn more and more from you and so on. So that frequency, that cadence is important. Learn and iterate. So the beauty of digital marketing and all this stuff is that you can measure everything. So measure everything and look what works, what doesn't. Right? Like I would look at my video logs and be like, this talk got like 10,000 views and this one got 1,000 views. Okay, well we're gonna like optimize now to have more of those talks, or like what worked, what didn't. So that gave us a lot of sort of knowledge about how to focus and get better at getting right speakers, getting right content, going with a concept A versus concept B, etc. So use the data essentially to be informed about which way to go. Cross-pollinate. So what I mean by this is that content marketing is there to provide more value than you capture, but you also have to capture the value, right? So the good way to do that is to if you're providing an article that's an awesome article, putting a little like, hey, we also do training, click here if you want to learn more. But kind of be clear about that. This is the paid training stuff, not free. It's very expensive. And then this is a great article that is free. So, but cross-pollinate those two things, right? So basically for us, it was like we had a lot of videos, and that was clearly good community stuff. But then we also had like, hey, this has a shopping cart, do sign up for that class. Come take it, right? So that's what I think by that. And that's basically it. I'm open for questions now.